All right, well, while they're getting settled, I want to get the thing running, I want to respond a little bit to Mark's comment, or no, Joe's comment. Who talked, was it, I can't remember which one of you was did, brought up the, what about, submitting to the almighty and wise hymnal committee that has produced this thing? You can probably tell where I'm going with this. If McLean was here, you might get a different response because, he has a very kind of English sense about him and a fantasy of submitting to the monarchy. But I am a full-blown American, and I do not think the American Revolution was wrong, and the like. So the idea that we would submit to some committee appointed by the Almighty Synod is the last word that we must get permission from before we modify the liturgy in line with our learning and the like is ridiculous to me. And I think it would actually be wrong of us to not be pushing the envelope in some of these things. And of course, that doesn't make me very popular with people who think it's their right to make the decisions for me. They think they've made the decisions, they're the best scholars and the like. But I don't think that at all. And I think that we actually have an obligation to do exactly the sorts of things that Father Braden was talking about. Not that our desire is to just be provocative at all times or troublers of Israel, though, that is a hero of the faith who's called that by a villain. Anyway, I think this is part of what actually the purpose of Gottesdienst is. We've sometimes described ourselves as a liturgical think tank. And we don't mean by that just the editors, but we mean the whole Gottesdienst crowd and how we kind of work together and try to move this thing forward. If we would have waited to have we would have waited for permission from the Missouri Synod to have early communion, we never would have had it. Some people had to do it and sort of push the envelope so that eventually in LSB it's now legal, right? If nobody would have worn a chasuble until everybody wears a chasuble, there would have been no chasubles and so forth. So I don't know if you guys want to respond to that while they think up some questions, or you want to just... I thought you would.
The wisest voice always waits till last, but what the heck. I was thinking of the answer actually when the final guy was given the question. And I think it needs to be said, especially to young seminarians and pastors going out. Somewhere I saw it written that you ought to leave it alone or break it. And even I, in my own liturgical setting, when I become convinced, because there are actually, believe it or not, some adiaphoristic things in the liturgy. And so even when I'm in my own liturgical setting, I become convinced that maybe something I've been doing might be wrong. I don't change it. I mean, I might be convinced over time that I really ought to, but even then, I purposely wait for sometimes years before actually making a change. And because sometimes I'll talk myself out of it. And I think that's an important thing, to be liturgically conservative for all of us when we come to the liturgy. I mean, maybe this think tank will produce something, but if so, it's going to take time. It's not the kind of thing we want to do willy-nilly or just, all right, let's make this change. I mean, that's where mischief happens, in my view.
Yeah, we are conserving, that is conservative, which means we conserve that which we have received. And the doctrine doesn't float loose. It's anchored in word and sacrament and delivered. So I agree with Father Eckhart. We must focus on what we have received, and changes must be well thought out, discussed among the brethren, and to Pastor Peterson's point, there comes a time where perhaps things need to be done. But it has to be with the emphasis of conservation, otherwise we'll look like the other side of the equation. We must change. We need more creative liturgy. Your turn to write.
You guys. I don't need the mic, but I think one way that this would be helpful, one place that this would be helpful, is in the instance of an epidemic.
Yeah.
What do you do? And how is it that we all did something different or we all did something the same? and what, what kind of future guidance can we create now so that we don't create doubt in the Eucharist or fear of the divine service, but at the same time that we work, well, as all the Gottesdienst editors always do, in lockstep.
Might I ask you, brothers, to reflect, perhaps, Dr. Eckert, on the presentation you've just heard about what changes that does bring to your mind that maybe we should begin contemplating?
I hate that question because, well, seriously, I hate the question because I might be thinking of something that could be reflected on and maybe changed over time, but I might change my mind about in years to come. I am really not the expert that should be answering this question. I mean, I'll reflect, I'll do what all these guys do, but these things, and it's like, we always made that joke about the Missouri Synod being a big ship that it takes a long time to turn. Well, the liturgy is a bigger ship. I mean, the Missouri Synod is just a tugboat, really. The liturgy is, the Gregorian ministry, Gregorian service has been around for, 1,400 years. You're just not going to poke it and jab it and just think, wow. Yeah, we got to think about these things, but you want to know what in particular. Even take, for example, what ought to be changed about where the Our Father is placed, before or after the Verba. And I know full well, and Father Brady knows full well, and we probably all know full well, that for centuries it was after the Verba. Now it's before in the common service, which I sort of like, because I've had this debate with Father Stuckwish, I know. I sort of like it before the Verba, because I think, I've learned this from Father Stevenson, that sometimes you just get this liturgical sense, and you don't have any proof of it, you haven't read it anywhere, but you just kind of think, that makes sense. And for that reason you do it. Little minor things I'm talking about. And I just, this is where I tongue-in-cheek say the Holy Ghost told me that it makes sense to have the Our Father prayed as the real epiclesis, however you want to pronounce it. You're praying for, you're praying for God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven, and for Him to give us our daily bread, and then bam, He does. That's so cool to me. So you can put it afterwards, but I know that Gregory said, let's just excise that stuff out of the middle, in between the two, which some scholar has devised or whatever. He said that shouldn't go there. So I like them being right next to each other, but as to which goes first, I don't know. I kind of like it the way it is, but maybe I'm wrong.
I would suggest that a good place to start would be to try to get our synod on the same liturgy. I don't think hymnals that have 5 liturgies are helpful.
Okay.
And I think trying to get us at least on the same liturgy would be, I'm sorry, yeah. I think trying to get us at least all on the same liturgy would be an important first step, because several of the presenters cited lex orandi, lex credendi, which is lex vivendi, right? That's how we live. We live a cruciform life because we leave the sacrament, the altar. This is Luther's post-communion collect. And for us to be living the same life, that divine service could be much more uniform. There's Christian freedom enters into this, and local practice enters into this. Dr. Yudish, who I think about every time I'm here, was our archdeacon. And he used to talk about local practice in the Ethiopian church being the umbrellas, because their practice was that when the processional came into the church, the president, the person that was presiding, was covered with an umbrella, ornamental umbrella, by somebody that walked behind him and carried the umbrella. And so this is an example of local practice. It's not commonly done, but it seems to send the right message, right? As the processional passes us, we reverence the crucifix, but we stay down until the celebrants pass, because this is the Viva Vox Christi among us. And So, using an umbrella in a processional is an interesting local practice, not something we all want to do. But I do think that getting us into a framework where the basic service that we're doing is the same service would be very helpful to our unity and our confession. And then after that, liturgy develops much like language. We study language in a written form, but language doesn't develop in a written form. It develops in a spoken form. And so liturgy develops in doing, kind of almost not in planning. I'm not afraid to talk about the role of the Holy Spirit in the church in that, although I stay away from holy tradition in that way. So I didn't answer your question, but I think that unifying the liturgical practices of the synod is probably the first place to start.
Yeah, so I didn't like Fritz's remark that he's not an expert and therefore can't make a decision on this. Because there's a tyranny of experts, as we all saw when during COVID, when we decided public policy should be decided by medical doctors who, if they could have their way, would wrap us all in saran wrap so that we could never touch a germ. And when you're focused on that, that's going to be your response because that's your area of responsibility. But that's not the right standard to make every decision in life. You have the same problem with lawyers. I don't like having lawyers on the church council because if you ask a lawyer, should we have vacation Bible school? He'll say no because there's a liability risk. You shouldn't do anything, right? Because because lawyers, that's their kind of focus. That you have, and when you put people like this, an expert, in charge of things, it creates problems. So I was sparked by what you said, Mark, that, right, this is in the doing. And I know this is like typical, throw stones at the ivory tower a bit. But the people this is the problem with Lutheran Service Builder. Lutheran Service Book. It has its strengths, and it can be used well, and you can make good choices with it. But that book is the product of a political apparatus that was meant to create a false sense of unity where we're divided. The reason there's 5 liturgies in there is so that there's room for everybody, no matter what he believes. Now, it's not quite that bad, but seriously, right? And when really, we could talk about, if we could have everybody in this room, we could probably come to some liturgical uniformity amongst us and make some good decisions in the doing, whereas an expert comes in and he has such a narrow focus or his own kind of pet peeve that he thinks cute, so we got somebody that knows about the umbrella, he sticks it in the hymnal, and because this is what he studied and he's fascinated by, right? And it's not actually a good decision. But anyway, I think really, I know this is harsh. If I was elected, and the bishop of the English district, may I be struck dead, I think, before. But I would say, look, here's my goal for the English district. I want every congregation to offer weekly confession and absolution, every Sunday service communion, and have closed communion. We don't have that, right? How can we be? We can talk here, God be praised, but when you look at the bigger picture, it's an absolute disaster, right? And how can you talk to somebody about whether or not we can have a Eucharistic prayer when they don't even believe in the bodily presence of Christ enduring? They believe in a second miracle of it turning back to bread and so forth. There's just so many problems. So anyway, how was that for a Gottesdienst rant? Next question.
So this is not a question. I have nominated you for the president. Or at least just out of here.
Thanks for all the presentations, all of you. They're all great. I learned a lot. But I wanted to ask about this attitude, which I've noticed a lot in the Missouri Synod, that we get told a lot, whenever a professor or a pastor finds out that we like to attend Redeemer or Bethany or Zion, they say, okay, buddy, you can enjoy that. That's good. Just know, when you get sent out into the parish, not every parish is going to be able to be Redeemer or Bethany or Zion, that type of thing. And so there's this attitude of liturgical defeatism as if like there's no future, there's no moving forward. And like it's true that like you're not going to walk in the first day and suddenly everybody's going to be open to Gregorian chant, but I would like to ask for any of you or all of you what you would think, how you would respond to that argument, or whether you think there's any truth or whether there's a kernel of truth to that, or what you think of that.
We recently received into our parish a retired pastor. It was a wonderful blessing. And he graduated a number of years before I did from the seminary. And one of his observations is that when he got out, most of his classmates got out and they had explosions in their congregation because they had taken liturgical practice that they picked up at the seminary. And when they got out into the parishes, they simply expected their parishes to do that thing. And like, moving the baptismal font and leaving the Paschal candle out all year and things like that. And so in defense of the seminary, you don't want to send guys out that are actually going to, create explosions. There's a way to teach this that isn't going to be injurious to parishes that are long-standing. My experience in the call that I received from Fort Wayne to North Wisconsin was that the practice there was very different than what I had experienced at Redeemer. And I had to bend a little bit, they had to bend a little bit. Ultimately, I broke because I took the call to Zion. And Zion is a good match for a man in a parish. But I think there is the need to understand that there is going to be local practice, and sometimes it's going to be long-established local practice, and a lot of times it's going to be wrong. And I think instructing the men in how to deal with that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with teaching the guys what's right and setting them out prepared for that. But there also has to be the ability to deal with bad practice and over time. I think that would be my.
Okay, I'm the strangest guy up here, because these guys are they've operated at a much higher caliber. I started as an associate, and that was kind of different, like sitting through an Advent sermon when the guy dressed as Mary. So I've been there and done some unusual things. I mean, if you went there now, we are not, I don't know if this is the right term, as high as Redeemer. But at the same time, over the years, we just slowly added things. Of course, one of my first actions was, mysteriously, these little red books called Hymns You Like to Sing, they vanished. I don't know what happened to them. They were just suddenly gone. I had to be caught in the crosshairs because they got the blue thing a year before, and a whole bunch of the older crowd wanted TLH back, and it wasn't going to happen because you had a group that wanted the blue, and I was like, somehow because of my age, I was the guy who wrote that hymnal. Lucky me. And so for a while, I was called the un-Lutheran one. I got a 6-page letter in which I was told I wasn't even Lutheran, and I mean, we have to run this guy out of synod and some things. That same guy, after about 10 years, was on his deathbed. I came and saw him. We were singing Lutheran hymns and doing it. You just kind of have to endure. And you do things along the way. You slowly add things. I mean, I didn't have the elevation for a long time. Worked it in after, it was after Pastor Yonke was gone. And he now, when he retired, he recognized something. He couldn't find a place where they actually sang Lutheran hymns and did the Lutheran liturgy. And he said, I miss it, especially because as you get older, like if we had the one liturgy people, and we all had the same thing, we could go from place to place and we'd have that unity that used to be there in a page 15, and you can say the weaknesses of that, but at the same time, it was there, it gave an anchor. And so as much as he had been a Chicago folk mass kind of guy, and that kind of thing, when he retired, he came to appreciate me more, and appreciate the liturgy more, and appreciate, we didn't sing How Great Thou Art once he was gone. we didn't sing, you know, I shouldn't even list them because this is on video. But there are a whole bunch of hymns that my people don't even know exist. My sons haven't had to sing them. And yet, those were, quote unquote, the old hymns, you know. And a few of the people still think of them, but they've come to love. I mean, we sang One Thing's Needful. And they didn't know that when I got there. At the Lamb's High Feast, we sing, you know, a whole, I could list, they didn't really know salvation unto us has come when I came there. So, I mean, they hadn't sung things, and now, you know, we had little things along the way. We put wood on our ceiling so you could actually hear people singing. It's a good singing congregation now. And that makes a huge difference, just having people sing. Little things along the way. Don't be defeatist about the whole thing. It does take, sometimes you do think, am I ever going to get some of this? But you can really turn, I've been there 37 years. And now we're doing, you know, but within a year and a half, I got the elders convinced I could wear a chasuble. I think it was even sooner, maybe. I mean, because that's an easy one to win. Why did I get a chasuble?
They're pretty.
They're pretty. Pretty works. Take it when you get it, you know.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, or it was donated. That was, you know, Paschal candles are pretty. Things like that, you know, that you're not going to have that big a problem with those kinds of things if you just sort of, it's, you know, sometimes it's just the reverence they have to get used to because they haven't been, you know, and it's so foreign. My sermons are foreign when people first come in because I talk in a language they're used to stories and they're used to these other things. But after they've been there for a while, they learn to hear differently. So all these things take time. You just can't sort of jump in and think, oh, I mean, the first time you show up at your parish, one, your sermons are probably going to stink for a couple of years, sorry. and then the other thing is, you're going to be so different than whoever was there before that they do have to learn to listen to you. And it takes time. It just is. Something that takes time.
Thanks. I'm going to chip in a couple comments. Agreeing with the brethren, but adding a bit. So God puts you there. You know, hopefully you're not going to be a hireling and have a mindset of being hired by these people to do things that they want. Jesus is against hirelings. I think a little better imagery to hold in mind is, even though I'm in the Army, I throw the Navy a bone whenever I can. So think of the captain of a ship. It's a big thing. The church is the ship. You can't turn it on a dime. And if you did, it'd probably capsize. But nonetheless, you're the captain. And God has formed you to deliver it. So although you can't make lots of changes all at once, you're at the helm. It's awesome. If you conduct yourself as if God were present, you know, he might be. You know what happens? People start, oh my gosh, like Carl was saying, there's a difference here. You're actually, it's not a show. God himself is present. That takes care of a lot. You've got the liturgy. You've got the word. You've got the sacrament. How you deliver that. I mean, that's the power. And then to, over time, incrementally with education, add, yeah. But God put you there, gifted you into the office for his body, the church. Drive it, Captain, but remember the ship's big, don't tip it over.
One bit of advice I would give is there are certain things you do have control over and you can do right away, things involving your personal piety when you're conducting the liturgy. So like you can cross yourself even if no one else in the congregation is, because that's your personal piety, but it is not just your personal piety. As the celebrant, that's part of the liturgy. So, you know, someone might not like it, but I think it would be really difficult for somebody to say, Pastor, you need to quit crossing yourself. Because, you know, that's your personal piety, but it's not also. So things like that, bowing, the way you hold your hands, the way you conduct yourself, your attitude really, your reverence. Reverence doesn't have to be high church. I was in Siberia one time, and this little congregation, they didn't have a place of their own. They rented a hall in a community center. And when I was visiting, it was on a different day. It was on Monday instead of Sunday, so their normal room wasn't available. So they rented a beauty salon. And we had the Mass in a beauty salon with barber chairs and product, and posters on the wall. But it was extremely reverent, even with a portable little altar. It was done reverently because the celebrant and the deacon conducted the liturgy with great reverence, and the people also, the lay people, understood that. So there are certain things that are under your immediate control, even from day one in the parish. So take advantage of that and make sure you demonstrate your reverence. And also, a lot of things do take a lot of catechesis, but sometimes I think we become paralyzed by fear to make even a small change. There was a pastor that I knew, he had been at his parish for a number of years, and he said, I'm still trying to teach them so that I can wear a crucifix, because he had a plain cross. He says, I'm still teaching. And then he was gone, and he went on vacation or something, and the visiting pastor who came in next Sunday had a crucifix, and nobody freaked out, nobody had an issue with it. So I told him, when he came back, I said, well, I guess you can wear your crucifix now. But we used to joke about that, the 75-year catechesis plan. You don't need, you know what I mean? Because catechesis is important, and writing letters, writing newsletter articles and Bible class, but it can be overdone too. That makes it psychological. Like if you're spending years to prepare people for wearing a corpus on your personal crucifix, you're almost like training them, like, this is really, a huge...
That's right.
It's almost a reverse psychology where you're scaring people about it. Sometimes you just do something. And that, the liturgy, the purpose of ceremonies is to teach the people. So sometimes we have this backwards. We think we have to teach before we do something, but sometimes the doing is the teaching. So it's an art, it's not a science, and every parish is different, and you're going to have to develop a sense of discernment. Of course, it is easier to get forgiveness than permission, but sometimes in the Missouri Synod, it's difficult to get forgiveness. But you will, when you get to your parish, you will get a sense of how hard to push the envelope. The stereotype is don't be a bull in a china shop and go in there and wreck the place. Of course, that's true. But there's also the other stereotype of where the pastor is afraid to be the pastor.
That's the captain.
Yes, like the chaplain said, you are the captain of the ship, and you have to, there's a balance, of course. You have to understand how your authority, you have your authority from the Holy Spirit, you have your authority from your call, from Christ himself. You're put into that office to be there, but you also do have to proceed with compassion for the weaker brethren and people that do need to be taught. But don't be afraid to push the envelope a little bit. It's like when you get braces on your teeth, that it might take a long time, but the pressure is consistent. It's very easy to just go in someplace and say, I'm not going to change anything for 2 years. I'm not going to change anything for 5 years. I'm not going to change anything for 10 years. And before you know it, the bad practices have calcified, and now you've made it harder for the guy coming after you. So I don't know if that's very good advice or not, but it does take discernment, and the Holy Spirit will provide that.
No, we're done. No, we're not. I haven't answered. It's my turn. It's my turn. This obviously was a great question because everybody wanted to answer that right now. This time I get to go last. None of the other stuff counts. Okay. This was a great question. And I mean, obviously all these things are important advice. And your question deals with method, right? How you do it. And I think the first thing has to do with what you know and what you believe and what you can't compromise. And there's some things, you can give and take and so forth. But there's some things you can't do. You come into a parish, you will not, on the first day, let the altar guild throw away those elements, right? That no way. I mean, I got the reputation when I was an associate of being a human vacuum cleaner because, the guy was, well, I did because the guy was administering the host and he was breaking them while he was going along. So there's little crumbs all over the place. I thought, oh, what do I do? So after the mass, I'm on my hands and knees on the floor looking for the little, and everybody saw that, and I became known as the human vacuum cleaner. Thanks be to God. So I'm done now. There you go.
Well, Chaplain Shaw said Mrs. Shaw gets to ask her question. So.
I just want to say thank you, and as a layperson, you're talking about what to do, how to do it, but what really helped me go from very loose liturgical background to more structured and holy is why. And so for many parishioners, it's really helpful to be taught why is the pastor wanting to make these changes, and to know that it's such a wonderful blessing and benefit to the congregant to receive the gospel all the more beautifully and fully can make a huge difference in motivating people to be willing to change. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much.